for our agenda is to push Africa's youth to participate in agro-business and agriculture in Africa. Once again, GJs, thank you so much. Every year, thousands of Africa's youth risk their lives daily as they journey through the Sahara Desert, with hopes of reaching the North African coast, where they take a small boat and sail for a week or two to Europe, their dreamland of greener pastures. Many perish on the way through dehydration, starvation, intense heat, sickness, and other causes. Their hope is reaching Europe, a land their vision is full of opportunities. Just like many young people in the world, Africa's youth also want something better. Africa is the youngest population globally. Africa has more people under the age of 20 than anywhere in the world. This is a massive potential workforce that can drive development in Africa. The problem, Africa's youth are unemployed. Unemployment leaves one feeling destitute, useless, worthless, and dependent. For the youth in Africa, all these feelings are felt by more than 2/3 of Africa's young people. Africa's youth face one of the highest unemployment rates in the world. Africa's youth unemployed population between the ages of 15 and 24 is increasing faster than in any other part of the world. The World Bank estimates that about 200 million youth fall into this category, constituting about 20% of Africa's population. Today, Africa's youth unemployment is no doubt a contributor to Europe's worsening migration crisis. Before we condemn the acclaimed future leaders of Africa for abandoning their homeland and embarking on an unjustifiable journey to Europe and across Africa, it is imperative that we take a look at the factors behind this odyssey. Poverty in Africa is at its peak, and this is largely due to misuse, mismanagement, and misappropriation activities by corrupt government officials and leaders in different sectors of the economy. While Europe governments offer African leaders financial support to impede Africa to Europe migrants, African governments face the dilemma of providing jobs for millions of their jobless citizens. Hence, unless the root causes of migration, poverty, underdevelopment, and unemployment are addressed, neither the European Union nor African governments will successfully stem the tide of Africa to Europe migration. So, at Crowborg, we believe investing in Africa's agriculture can address not only Africa's problems, but migration problems in Europe. We can closely work with the European Union, African governments, and private sector to curb the crisis by investing in Africa's agriculture and agro-business sector. When most people look at Africa, there are two very strong but opposite images that emerge. Some see a continent that is full of problems, unemployment, disease, hunger, and insecurity, a place where everything is wrong and nothing works. Others see a land of vast opportunities and untapped potential. Optimists like to describe Africa as the world's last frontier of lucrative business opportunities, while the ignorant and fearful see a dark and unpromising continent. Smart entrepreneurs are realizing amazing business opportunities that lie beneath all of Africa's problems. Africa's size cannot be ignored. Its vast uncultivated croplands and young workforce are among some of the reasons why Africa's time is now. With 60% of the world's potential farmland and youngest population, Africa could become an agricultural powerhouse. Africa's economy is growing faster than any economies of all other continents. About a third of Africa's 54 countries are seeing annual GDP of more than 6%. This growth is not just about diamonds or oil. Africa's size cannot be ignored. Its vast uncultivated croplands and young workforce are among some of the reasons why Africa's time is now. With 60% of the world's potential farmland and youngest population, Africa could become an agricultural powerhouse. Africa's economy is growing faster than the economies of all other continents. About a third of Africa's 54 countries are seeing annual GDP of more than 6%. This growth is not just about diamonds or oil. Only 24% of growth between 2000 and 2008 was attributed to natural resources. Today, Africa is the biggest real estate with the most natural resources and a dynamic young population that is oblivious of the fact. It's time to create awareness. So, what is making this diverse and complex continent boom? Africa has a huge market potential. Africa is increasingly becoming stable. Intra-Africa trade is in its infancy. Africa will soon have the world's largest workforce. African governments are spending more on education. Mobile use is fast exploding. Africa contains most of the world's uncultivated croplands. Why has Africa been unable to grow its agricultural sector? Like other sectors, why, instead of bumper crops, does Africa have an annual food import bill of 35 billion US dollars? The problem is straightforward. The odds are stacked against Africa's farmers. Importing food means Africa is exporting jobs worth 35 billion US dollars annually. If we are to create jobs in Africa, that needs to change. If you look at women in Africa, 80% of the agricultural production comes from small farmers who are mostly rural women. Women make the largest percentage of the workforce in Africa's agricultural sector, but they do not have access and control to all land and productive resources. This is particularly true for smallholder farmers, most of who are women. They contribute or cultivate plots about the size of 1 or 2 football fields, typically lacking irrigation systems and quality inputs, such as seeds and soil supplements. Moreover, they rarely earn enough to reinvest in the needed machinery and cannot gain access to credit. So agriculture becomes clustered in a cycle of poverty. When it comes to Africa's youth, one cannot blame Africa's youth for not willing to engage in agriculture. To the youth of Africa, agriculture is not glamorous. It suffers from entrenched negative perceptions. In the minds of many African youth, a farmer is someone like their parents doing back-breaking labor in the fields and getting little to show for it, particularly when they think of the backaches as a result of the tools being used. Today, 75% of Africa's population are young people below the age of 35, with a high propensity to feed Africa. Youth in Africa hold great potential as drivers of economic growth through participation in labor markets and also as consumers. A young population can also be a resource that leads to innovation and supports governance and political reforms. However, a large youth population that is not gainfully employed can also be a liability, further undermining growth prospects. Nevertheless, agriculture is the engine driving many African economies. If it were to get the same political support and financial investment as the mining sector, agriculture would be capable of providing more decent jobs and filling more stomachs with nutritious meals. We have to turn Africa's agriculture into a business rather than look at it as a developmental activity. Africa's agriculture has to be driven by young entrepreneurs. Africa's agriculture has to be private sector driven by Africa's future leaders. The recent boom in Africa's telecommunications sector demonstrates just how effective private sector investment approach can lead to growth in Africa's economies. In such a context, the continent's agricultural sector could unleash a revolution akin to that fueled by the telecommunications industry. Agriculture and agro-business together are projected to be a $1 trillion US business in Sub-Sahara Africa alone by 2050, compared to $310 million US in 2010. So these two sectors, these two critical sectors, should be at the top of the agenda for economic transformation and development in Africa. At Crowborg, we are working towards transforming Africa's agricultural sector for the future so that it can be attractive to Africa's youth. First, we have identified the profound challenges faced by Africa's youth in seeking greater participation in the agricultural sector. Challenges such as, number one, access to knowledge, information and education, access to land, access to financial services, access to green jobs, access to markets, and finally, engagement in policy dialogue. So currently, we are working on creating partnerships to address the issue of specific knowledge transfer and information to Africa's emerging farmers. We are strategically structured to participate in economic empowerment initiatives in Africa. Through working with global partners in the same industry, we can also help Africa's youth to participate in green jobs. Africa's large youth population is taking a keen interest in political and electoral processes which greatly influence reforms. The subject of what can attract youth better in Africa's agriculture has not been fully addressed in Africa's agricultural sector. In fact, there has been so much fewer suggestions under this than under what discourages youth. This reflects genuine lack of ideas, both by youth and those who are concerned for them. Addressing the problem of unemployment will help curb Africa to Europe migration and also help create sustainable long-term empowerment for Africa's future generation. The case for investing in Africa has already been made. While we are convinced that entrepreneurship is a global solution to the global problem of unemployment, we believe Africa's agricultural sector needs more finance that will help translate its economies to growth and inclusion. At Crowborg, we are seeking for finance through our fund, the Crowborg Agricultural Fund. Our fund will help push for productivity in agriculture and also try to push the trade agenda, trade and integration between the region and the rest of the world, including Europe. We believe Africa has huge potential to export agricultural products to the rest of the world. And so, to do this, we need a combination of things like infrastructure and trade finance to facilitate the movements of products. So at Crowborg, we are seeking sponsorship from the European Union, governments and government agencies, international financiers, multilateral institutions, multilateral agencies, multinational corporations, donors and philanthropists. Africa is much more a desirable destination for financing and investing. Given that agriculture is projected to be a $1 trillion business in Sub-Sahara alone, so if you look at the requirements we have initiated in our Crowborg Agricultural Fund, this is a very tiny drop in the ocean. This is only the first step. We believe that there is much more capacity for potential funders to do more with us in this region. At Crowborg, we are a step ahead in improving solutions to Africa's unemployment problems. We are Crowborg Limited, a young company that has been formed by young African entrepreneurs that are very entrepreneurial, but we are looking at a sector in agriculture and agro-business. This is a sector where we are saying Africa's youth can actually realize growth potential by participating in this agricultural and agro-business sector. So to GJs and crew, we want to say thank you so much for shooting our video, and thank you so much for your time and partnership with Crowborg Limited. For our agenda is to push Africa's youth to participate in agro-business and agriculture in Africa. Once again, GJs, thank you so much.
Respect.